after I retired, I needed something to do when it came fall. The first fall, I thought, what am I going to do? And I can't remember if it was UNI or Hawkeye Tech, but I had their catalog. Must have been Hawkeye Tech because it was a thin catalog. Had rug hooking as a class and weaving on the looms where they threw the shuttle. And well, when I called up there, the weaving class that I thought I wanted was full and over and done with. But the rug hooking class was still available. So I thought, well, better than nothing, I'll do it. And rug hooking was old. It was a very old method of making something from nothing. And they say it started with sailors on the boats when they were sailing, and it took like months to get to Australia and all those places. Well, they had burlap because their products were put onto the boat in burlap bags. And they had fish hooks, which they probably filed down or even took a screwdriver or a pick or something that they had and made very primitive hooks out of it, because they have found some pieces that they knew were very, very primitive. So I took the rug hooking class, and I wanted hooked rugs in my house, and old hooked rugs are very expensive. And the new hooked rugs that come from the Far East, if they're really good quality, are very expensive. And since I'm a cheapie, I decided I could hook my own. And so that's why I have hooked rugs all over my house and on my walls and on my chair seats. And the pineapple back here is hooked. And my youngest granddaughter, her favorite piece that I've hooked is a pumpkin about this big with a face on it for the jack-o'-lantern on one side, and it's plain on the other, and it's stuffed and it's heavy. So when Halloween is over, I just turn it around and it serves for Thanksgiving. Now, just over Easter, we were down in the basement, and Hannah said, "Oh, Grandma, this is still my favorite piece that you've done." And she went over and plopped it and turned it around from the opposite way that I had it. So I think she's going to get some of the rugs. They've just bought a house, and I think it'll fit in some of the things that she's doing. So anyway, that's how I got started. And my teacher was a lady that lived up on the hill from UNI and had taught school and had taught hooking years ago. And I took lessons from her, and then I got started and I went to the internet to find out where the hookers really were. Well, in Iowa at that time there were not very many, but I discovered the group at Decorah, and so I found out when the first meeting was going to be for the next time for me, and I trucked myself up there and got acquainted. And Esther Miller was an elderly lady, and she just kind of took me underneath her wing, and she thought everyone should do fine cuts, and I was an old, dyed-in-the-wool, as they say, wide cut because I wanted it to look primitive, and wide cuts are easier to give that primitive look. But I went to school at Duluth. She talked me into going, and I met people that I'd never met before. 3 of them rode to Duluth with me in my old van, and when we got through with that school, I was still going to the meetings every month, and she says, "Well, next spring in March or April, we always go to West Virginia to the Pearl McGowan rug hooking school, and I really think you should go." Well, it was like the chief leading the blind, because I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. So I got my frame and everything, and they were going to pick me up at the truck stop, Casey's, at the south edge of town. And Gordon pulled in and parked, and they pulled in beside us. Well, I had a frame similar to this, but it was metal with a stand. And the first thing she says is, "Tell Gordon to take that stand home. We haven't got room for it in the car." And they didn't. There were 4 of us going. It was a small, I don't know what they called them. They didn't call them vans, whatever preceded vans, with the wood trim and everything. I mean, it was old too. But we went, and we stopped at every Goodwill store between here and there. The driver was a younger person that was a good friend and had worked with Esther for a long time. Anyway, we were using a lot of recycled wool, and like I said, we stopped at every Goodwill and Salvation Army, and Duder had everything mapped out where we were going to stop and where it was located in the town. Well, when we came home, Esther was sitting in the passenger seat, and she was sitting on recycled clothes. She had all the men's pants that she had found that she thought would make good wool laying over the back of her seat. I sat in the back with Mary, and we had it piled as high as we could pile in the middle between us. And in the back, every time Ann would open the door to put anything in, something would fall out. It was one of those where you opened just the top of the top window, you know, and if we could not have done it if we'd gone with the ones that it would have all rolled out. And everyone had a stand for their frame but me. But I didn't know the difference, you know. After that, I never cared. So I didn't always take a frame. It was just easier to take the stand. It was easier just to take the frame. And so that's how I really got started, because then I decided I wanted to go back until I was certified McGowan teacher. And I am. Not that it means anything to most people.
Yeah.
But if it's a Pearl McGowan rug hooking school, they have to be certified Pearl McGowan. So. Well, I think my husband's car one is probably been one of my favorites. I've enjoyed every one that I've made, and that was why I picked it out. You know, it was because I liked it. But that one I knew would mean something to him, more so than just the other rug hooking. He was about as interested in my rug hooking as I was in the engines in the cars. I thought they looked nice, you know, but when they got to talking motors and wheel size, and I was lost, and I didn't care. I didn't want to be found either. The latest one that I made, the one of our family, I have enjoyed listening to the kids. I think I took the class for that in 2014, and I think on there it says that I finished it in 2018. Now, for a year, I probably didn't work on it because I had other projects going. But then once I got back to it, I had to find pictures of everything that I wanted, because an artist I'm not as far as sitting and drawing. I had to have the picture. So I took pictures off of postcards, out of magazines, and then I would blow them up on my computer to the size that I wanted it to put on the rug, and that was how I did that. One of the funny stories with my rugs, my first teacher that I took lessons from, I said, I want a rug that doesn't have, can't just look at it one direction. I want it to be all directions. So she went through an old book that she had, and I said, oh, I like that one right there. It's just got lots of different motifs on it, squares, and each one was probably about 12, 14 inches square. And there were 3 across or 4 across. I ought to know, I walk on it every day because it's upstairs in the hallway on the floor. Well, neither one of us looked how big the rug was. And she called me one day and she says, "Wanda, your rug pattern came." I said, "Oh, good, I'll be up to get it." She just laughed. When I got up there, she opened it up. It is large. It is as big as the one underneath the dining room table, maybe a little bit bigger, I don't know. But I got it done. It was always a challenge. Every rug was a challenge.
Yeah.
And all my life, I think I've liked a challenge.
Yeah.
It was what kind of drove me to, even when I taught, and kids would give you that shoulder, and I thought, "Oh, I'm going to go after you. You're not going to know it." But we started out with just 4 of us, 3 from Waterloo and myself, and we would meet. We weren't an organized ATHA group. And then one of the girls that started hooking with us said we should become an ATHA group. And so that's what we did. And we brought in more. We had teachers from Waterloo, or they were teachers or nurses. We have some from Cedar Rapids, quite a few from Independence now. We have a few that have been way out, like from Dubuque and Bondurant. Bondurant now has an ATHA group that meets. Our ATHA group is called Between the Rivers Rug Hookers, and we said that because we were between the Mississippi and the Missouri. There was no other ATHA group when we made it. When we did ours and got it certified, we were the only one. And I can't remember now what theirs is called, but they have a lot more young people, and young meaning 50s. You don't have time to do it when you're young. You're working, you're raising a family. It is time consuming, and it is expensive. If you want to have a good big frame, but frames can be anything that hold it in place. And when you hear people talk about their old antique rugs and how they deteriorate, I laid out, these are some old rug patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is probably one of the oldest. And you will notice how the material, it's burlap, but it's just flat. Well, that burlap, when it's turned over and that dries out and gets dry, then the old rugs deteriorate around the exterior.
Okay.
And they start to pull apart there.
Mm-hmm.
Today, this is burlap, but it's a modern burlap. And this is monk's cloth, and it's made out of cotton. It's a 4x4 weave. Probably the most common one is linen. I guess I don't have any except this is linen, and it's much more pliable.
Mm-hmm.
I can roll that up and it's not going to break, and it's going to last. They always say hooked rugs are good for generations if they're taken care of correctly, because the wool doesn't wear out. Like some of the fibers that people made. They used anything, not just wool. If they had a cotton dress or an apron, they hooked with it. Mm-hmm. The patterns were very, very primitive. the things they saw every day. And that would have been similar to what the people in your book that you promoted would be. Flowers, animals, houses, sheds, lots of different building shapes in some of the old patterns.
Yeah.
But a lot of flowers of various kinds. There are a lot of rug hookers in the United States that hook with fibers other than cotton. They'll hook with lace, they'll hook with ribbon, they hook with lots of different things. And there was a very early group up in Nova Scotia and down along the border that hooked in with women's nylon hose and their underwear, because it was before nylon hose, they were rayon hose, and their panties and their undershirts were rayon, the old, which was the first man-made fiber, but it's actually a cotton. It's a lot of cotton, and they cut that wide and then pulled it, and it kind of curled.
Okay.
And it had a very particular name, and a lot of people, when they go into rug hooking, go into it because they do want something that looks old. And so when they dye their fabric, they dye it so that it looks aged and old. But a lot of it is modern, with a lot of buttons and glitzy things, which that's not for me, but it's everyone's different, and they can do whatever they want to with it. When I started out, I used a lot of recycled wool, and this was like a jumper. And one of the best kinds of reused wool that I found that I liked was men's wool shirts, work shirts, and I could find them all the time. I can remember we had a son that lived in Ankeny, and I remember going down there when the Goodwill opened for the first week, and I came out with 3 garbage bags full of recycled wool. I bring nothing into my house like that. It stays in the trunk of the car. When it gets comes in the house, it goes from the garbage bag into the washing machine, and it's washed in hot water. As long as you don't change the temperature real fast, you don't cause it to, I can't now remember the word I want to use. It's gone from my mind, where it gets real thick.
Okay.
But I can't think of it.
Yeah.
When I started, there were very few vendors, and that is amazing. Since '98, when I started hooking, till now, the people that are in the business of selling patterns and equipment and wool, now you can order wool by the yard, and you can just do anything you want to with it. You can get the texture you want. It comes almost ready to hook, where these kinds of things are going to be thinner, and most of us would not want that. We would want to tighten that up a little bit. So we would kind of shock it with going from hot to cold.
Okay.
But it's all washed and goes in the dryer. And I have hooked on burlap, I've hooked on rug warp, I have hooked on monk's cloth. That's what this is with the 4x4. My favorite is the linen. I don't dislike the new burlap. Now, a lot of ladies do not like it, the new, but I didn't dislike it. I couldn't tell a whole lot of difference from it. It didn't make me sneeze, or some of them found out they were more allergic to some things than others. And it's a dusty business. When you put it through the cutter, you just get all kinds of dust down in underneath and on your table wherever you're cutting. And if you're allergic to that, you're gonna have to wear your mask. We'd get along fine in COVID because we'd have a mask on anyway. And we had a couple that always, every time they cut anything, they would wear a mask so they didn't get very many of those fibers in.
Mhm.
There are all kinds of shapes and manufacturers of hooks. When I got mine out to bring up to show to you, this is the only one that's a different brand, and I don't even know which one it is, but it is my favorite hook if I'm going to hook 3s or 4s. These are all called Hartman hooks. This is called a bent hook, and lots of manufacturers now make bent hooks. The hook is very similar to a crochet hook, except it's usually kind of pointed on the end, where a crochet hook tends to be rounded. Some manufacturers have more rounded ends to their rug hooks, but I don't like those. It goes through much easier. It has not a sharp point, but just a smooth point that goes into it. And a lot of people like the bent hook. And this has a place for your thumb on there so that you know you're hooking and hooking it correctly. These two, this one is just middle size. The shank is middle size. That shank goes clear down in through your backing and your wool, and that's what opens that up for you to pull the wool through. If you're really using a big cut, you're going to go to one with the biggest shank you can find, and this is the biggest shank that you can find. A lady talked me into buying this hook, and it was the first time I had used anything other than this and just a regular rug hook that was an offbeat brand. Well, I had it probably for a year, and I'd never used it, but I went back to Duluth again to rug school, and that we also could take classes at night. They were just short classes, and you'd sign up and pay for that particular class. And so when I went through to register, they handed me all my information that I'd paid for, and it was for that class. Mm-hmm. So in the afternoon, before we got ready to leave for dinner, this teacher stands up and she says, "Now I want you all to bring your Hartman big fat hook." And I thought, oh, I'm going to get to use it for the first time. After I got started using it and got used to it, I used it a lot. You can see how this color probably started out like this.
Oh, wow.
And the more you use it, the darker it gets from the oil in your hand, you know. And I have never bent one of my hooks, but several, I don't know what in the world they were pulling through that was so heavy, but they've actually pulled their hook around and bent it a little bit. So husbands can do wonderful things, though. They can work on their frames and they can work on their hooks and straighten them out. And this is a little awl, and some people use tweezers so that you can reach in underneath that hook if you aren't getting it lifted up high enough. And the height of your loop, you become accustomed to how high to pull that. The first thing that you make might be high and low, but you get used to doing it so that it isn't. Yeah. And that's really all you would need, and a pair of scissors. Yeah. So that you could cut your wool however long you wanted it, and a cutter. I would not be a rug hooker if I had to cut all my wool by hand. If I decide I want to just cut a little piece of something off, you know, to like around the eye or something to put, I have a terrible time because my cutting is, and I try to lay it down, you know, and get it straight, but you don't see that when you get it hooked in. But to do all your rugs from that, oh, it wouldn't be for me.